Hi, welcome back to this Let's Build with ASP.NET MVC series. This is the final whistle project, and we are actually on video 4. Well, we're on video 3.5, because if I flick back into GitHub in the project, you can see what we're going to be doing in this video is actually creating a match. We've just done adding a new team and validating that, which was these two blocks here. I've actually added another card to this column for the sharp-eyed amongst you. So we've done these two here. We've done show how to add a new team and explain how we validated, and we showed how we validated against making sure that there was actually a team name entered, that it wasn't empty, and also that the team didn't already exist. So we know how to communicate back and forward with the database to add a new team into the database. But the video went on quite long because I was basically explaining how the data access worked and stuff like that, and how the forms were generated. Hopefully this one won't, because you're already familiar with it, so we can crack on. But now this time we're going to allow entering an actual match and store the data about the match, like the score and stuff like that, and adding that into the database as well. So just think of this as being in another column. This is video 3.5 before we actually get to the match report, because obviously we can't create a match report until we've created a match. So that's what we're going to do now. So we are here. As you can see, we've got a list of all of our teams, and that's on the team management page. We need to create a new page for our matches in much the same way as we did for the teams. So I'll flick back into Visual Studio. I'm just going to terminate that. And if you remember, we created a controller for our teams. If we go back to the actual page and I hover over that, you can see the URL at the bottom left there says /matches. So we need a matches controller. So let's just create that. Add controller and empty controller. Let's add it. Matches. Dead easy. Let's open the teams controller. And you can see what we did was we created a teams repository. So I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to quickly run through it in much the same way. We've got a teams repository where we added a data context, and we added some methods for getting all the data back. So I'm actually going to just really quickly create that, because we don't need to run through that again. If you want to see what it is that we're actually doing, just look at the previous video, but I'll just quickly run through this. So we're going to call this matches repository. We're going to put our data context in, and we need a method to bring back all of the matches. Actually, let's do a list of matches. Get all matches. So all that's doing is just returning a list of all of the matches whenever someone initializes this matches repository. And I'll just close that down. So we'll go to our matches controller, and actually I can just copy and paste from the teams controller. I'll just copy and paste that entire thing from the index method, and I'll just change it to reflect that we're now dealing with matches. So matches repository, copy and paste. We'll call it matches rep. Is it match or match repository? What did I just call that? Matches repository. Oh, I know why. It's because we haven't included the models reference. There we go. So we've got a matches repository. My matches, we'll call that. If my matches.count is greater than 0, my matches. And the method we're going to be calling is the one we've just created, get all matches, and we want to order by, what should we order by? We'll order by the date, the timestamp. So we'll do the earliest first this time, the latest first, order by descending. So obviously it'll go from like today, yesterday, day before that. So we've got my matches in there, that's our view data. And what I need to do now is just I've got a new folder automatically being created called matches, and I can actually just copy and paste the index from teams into matches, and then open it up and just change it to reflect what it is that we're going to be doing. So my matches, or all matches, sorry. We'll just change everything referencing team to matches. My matches. This is where it's going to get a little bit more complicated. My matches. This becomes a match, and we'll change that to M. So we've got a header here of team name. We're going to call that home team. We're going to create another one called away team. We'll call this one the result, and we'll call this one the date of match. So we're changing everything to do with teams to become matches, so that's that. Now we need to fill in these new columns. We've got 4 columns instead of 1. The first one was my home team, so we want the home team ID. We'll create another column, another one, and another one. So we got away team ID, and we'll do this one, the date of match, date, or was it timestamp? Yeah, might have to convert that to a string value. No, should be alright. Oops, matches, no matches. And this one is the result. So what we want to do is we can just put m.home goals and then a dash and then m.away goals. Oops, away goals. So that should actually just show the result. But when I run this, hopefully you're following what's going on here, by the way. In the matches controller, we're basically running through, we're creating a matches repository, we're getting a list of all the matches, checking to see if there are any. If there are, we're then putting it into this variable here called my matches, in a list that's ordered by the timestamp in descending order. Then we're just returning the view, bearing in mind that that's getting passed through to it. When we go to the view, we're checking to see if it exists. If it doesn't, we'll show there no matches. If it does exist, we start creating this table, and then we loop through them all and display the different information about each record. So if I just run this now, we should be able to click on this matches tab, and it'll basically show that there aren't any matches. So we should be good to go now. Yeah, it's ready. So matches, it should say all matches. There are no matches to come from the database, or whatever it is. There you go. No matches to display from the database. And we've got a button here that says add, and that's going, if you look at the bottom left, that's going to matches add. So we need to create that page. And it's pretty much the same as last time as well. I'll just close all these down. We'll open up the Teams controller. And if you remember, we had an add method. So let's just copy and paste that into matches. That's our get, and we can also let's just make a duplicate of that for the post. But this time, instead of a team being passed to it, we'll actually be passing a match. And again, we're going to pass whatever we enter through if we get back to it. So now all that we need to do is we need to actually create the view that matches up on these that matches up to these URLs. So if we go to our matches folder, again we're going to create this add thing, but remember we have to scaffold it. Now this one's going to be a little bit more complicated because we have there's more to a match in terms of the data. You see, we've got all these properties, whereas in a team we've only really got the team name to worry about. So all of these are going to be generated automatically by the scaffolding. So we go to matches, we'll say add new scaffold item, and we want a view, MVC5 view, and it's going to be called add. It's going to be a template of create, and the model class this time, not team, it's going to be match. We're using the admin layout, and we'll just hit add. It'll generate it for us, and you can see there's more to it, but it's exactly the same thing. These are just the separate items for each of those properties. So if I run that now, if I run this software now, and we click on the add page, we'll see a bare bones form, but it'll have all of these different properties that we can then add into the database. So just reload that page, and hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. And I'm basically trying to illustrate how easy it is to kind of copy and paste and just get it working in pretty much the same way. So we're progressing more rapidly than we were before because we've done like the initial setup and we know what we're doing now. So if I click on add, There we go. I'm just going to change that very slightly. Just going to change the name of it. Go to matches, add. I'm going to change that to an h1 tag and call it add. Oops. Add match, just to make things a little bit clearer. And I'll just refresh that page, so we should have a nice little header at the top saying add match. So you can see what we've got here is we've got a home team ID, which is a numeric value. It's actually created a numeric field there. The away team ID, pretty much the same. The home goals, that's numeric as well. The away goals is numeric, and the timestamp is a date picker. Now the format of that would be just a normal date, like, I don't know, 18th of September 2016, or however you wanted to type it, but it must be a valid date. So we need to do some pretty much some more in-depth coding for this, because we can't just type, if you remember, we can't type Tottenham in there. I can't actually type text in there. I can type numbers, but I can't type letters. But the problem is, if I typed in number 9, if we look in our database, we don't actually have a team with a number 9. If I go to the Server Explorer and open the teams up, I don't have a team 9, so what's the point in that? I mean, I couldn't say team 9 because it doesn't exist in the database. So I need to basically make sure, as part of my validation, that I can't actually type a value that doesn't exist, because I can't create a match between two teams that don't exist. Now, this thing here, obviously we need the ID. How would you know what the ID is? Well, the answer is you shouldn't. You as the user, you shouldn't actually need to know what the ID is of the team that you're using. You just basically want to select a name of a team for the home and away sides, and then have the website take care of the rest. So what we need to do is, I think we need to change this form so that instead of using this input box with a number, it needs to be a drop-down list of all of the different teams. So in the views, we need to actually generate a list of all of the teams in the database, and then convert this text box into a drop-down box, and then pass the IDs over automatically, while just sort of selecting the actual text name of the team that we want to pick. So how do we do that? Well, thankfully it's pretty easy. The first thing we're going to have to do is we are going to have to create a list of the teams within our matches controller. So I'm just going to close down the teams controller. We're in the matches controller, we're in the add method, and what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make a reference to the teams repository. So teams repository, oops, can't even type. And I'll say view data teams equals teams rep dot find, I'll get all teams dot order by team name to list. So we're getting actually we don't need that on the end because it automatically converts it to a list. So basically you can see what's happening here. We're actually, although we're in the matches controller, we're referencing the teams thing that we've already built and calling our method that we've already built to get all the teams back, and we're putting that in the view data, and that's actually going to be sent to the view. But at present that won't actually do anything because we're not dealing with it at the view, in the view. Now if you remember, we've called this view data teams. That's going to be the teams list. But what we need to do is we need to just edit this page, and instead of this home team ID being an editor for, we need to actually get rid of that. In fact, I'll leave it there for now, but I'll just illustrate what it is that we're going to be doing. Instead, we want a drop-down list for, not an editor, and we need to pass our view data as the sort of the list items that we're going to use to populate the list. So I'll say html.dropdown list for, and I'll say, now how do I do this? So we're referencing the property home team ID. Can't remember how to do this offhand. And We might need to convert them to select list items. Well, let's just try it. I'll say view data teams and see if that works. I don't know if it will. Numerable select list item. Bear with me 2 seconds. I can't actually remember how to do this. That may work. It may not though. Let's just see. Let's see if that works, but I suspect it's going to bomb out because it's expecting select list items rather than list items. Let's give it a shot. So I'll just quickly run that by pressing F5. Build succeeded. Let's refresh this page, and hopefully it'll have a text box and a drop down list, but I suspect it is going to bomb out. Hopefully it won't, but I suspect it is. There we go, it's bombed out, and it's going to say we're trying to convert the list of what's it saying? Yeah, we're trying to convert it to list items, so we're going to have to do a little bit extra code here. Oops. So we'll go back into our controller, and what we need to do is we need to convert our teams into select list items rather than just list items. So what we'll do is we will just say, we'll get rid of that view data teams, and we'll say var my teams. So now we're basically holding a variable that we can operate on in here, and I'll say if my teams dot count greater than 0. I will say list select list God, how do I do this again? Bear with me 2 seconds. Right, so I need to make a new IEnumerable of select list item. Team list equals new. Oh God. Let's just create a list. What am I doing? Right, so basically we're creating a new list of select list items called team list. And so for each team T in my teams, we want to create a new select list item. And within that select list item, we need to set its properties. So sli dot, and it's going to ask me for the text equals team name, and the ID, I'll put that above, say dot ID, or value, sorry, is what they call it, equals t dot ID. And then we need to just add this into our list. So team list dot add SLI. So hopefully you can see what's going on there. We're basically looping through all of the teams. We've created a team list that we're going to use. We're looping through all of the teams, and every time we loop through a team, we create a new select list item, and then we add the value, the value that's going to be in the drop down list in the background, like the number 9 or 5 or 6 or whatever, and the text that corresponds to it, which is the team name. Now I'm going to need to convert that to a string, because right now it's an integer value. But whenever we do that, we actually then just add the new select list item to our team list, and then once we finish that, we can say view data my teams equals team list. So hopefully that will work, because now this value here, this view data my teams that we're passing into this drop down list, which is there, the view, we called it view data teams, let's call it my teams. In fact, no, let's call it teams, and I'll change that in the controller. View data teams equals team list. Now the danger here is that could potentially be null, but it doesn't really matter for this purposes because it's not going to be. We have got teams. we're always going to have teams, so we'll just leave that as it is. If that was null, then it would probably cause a failure. In fact, let's fix it now. Let's just always make sure that there's a list, whether it's empty or not. So we'll just put a list there, and we will make sure that we always have a view data defined which contains that team list. And even if it doesn't execute this code here, it will always be passing team list through, even if team list is empty and it hasn't gone through all of this all of these teams. Sorry if that's a little bit long-winded, but I'm going through this and basically figuring this out as I go as well, so bear with me. So we've got view data teams. It's supposedly a list of select list items that we have gotten from our repository. We've looped through them, added all the different teams into the select lists, and we're passing it back. That's going to be handed to the view. The view is going to deal with it by generating a drop-down list using that view data of type select list item to generate the drop-down box. So in theory, that should work. So let's just run this. The build started, the build succeeded, it's ready. So we should be able to refresh this page, and hopefully we should have a drop-down list as well as a text box. Let's just let it kick in. So you can see we've got the home team ID, but we've also got a list of all of our teams that we can select. So if we inspect this, just right click on it and then click on inspect if you're in Google Chrome like I am, we can see this is the select list. It's called home team ID, and you can see the different the options. You can see the IDs correspond to what we entered in the database. Tottenham is ID number 1 because it's the first one we entered into the database, and this is the value that's actually going to get passed back into the post method when we submit the form. And the good thing about this is, because we've actually defined the teams, we can reuse that code to generate one for the away team ID as well. So let's just go into here as well. We can get rid of that editor for the home team ID because we don't need it. We've got a drop down list now, and we can just copy and paste this in the underneath over the top of the editor for the away team ID as well, and just make sure that we change that property to away team ID. And because it's using the same code, it's going to use the same view data. If we save that, we don't even need to recompile the application and rerun it. We can just refresh the page, and we should just have 2 drop-down lists for the home and away teams. So there we go. We've got a home team and an away team. Now, if we go back to our teams and add a new team, let's say Leicester. Can't even spell Leicester. Leicester. That's better. Leicester City. Let's create that. If I go back to my matches and add a new match, you can see I've got Leicester in there now. And because it's alphabetical, Leicester's actually gone to the top. So, you know, if I was to add another one, like not Crystal Palace, we want something in the middle. Let's say Liverpool. Let's add a new team called Liverpool. Create. You can see in the list of teams it's appearing, and it's appearing alphabetically. In the matches, we add a new match. Again, it's alphabetically in that list as well. So we've got the start of a really dynamic application here. And what we need to do now is, now that we've sorted out this home team ID and the away team ID, we can now set it up to accept the home goals and the away goals and the timestamp as well. Now, hopefully, you'll know what I'm going to do next, which is to edit the post one. So basically, if we look back at the teams controller that we did before, if we look at the post thing, we're basically going to say we're going to do some little bit of validation on here to sort of determine whether or not this is a valid result going into the database. So what we need to do is we need to customize this basically for our match. We need to make sure that not only are we entering goals for both the home and away, we also need to make sure that we're entering a valid date, and we also need to make sure that there's a valid home and away team. But we also need to make sure that the home and away team aren't exactly the same as each other. So let's dig into that. So if you remember, this is the thing that we do here for the model state, for adding the errors. Yeah. So let's just copy and paste this. first check we need to do is have we entered home and away goals. So let's check that. If match.away goal, sorry, let's do home first. In fact, string.is null or white space match.home goals. Actually, I think it'd be an integer value. I think it might just need to check if it's null or not. Yeah, that's what we need to do. If match.homeGoals is not null, we can proceed. Else, we need to add a model error, and we need to call it home goals. Please make sure you've entered the number of goals that the home team scored. We can copy and paste that. So if match.away goals is greater than is not equal to null, we proceed. Otherwise, please make sure you've entered the number of goals that the away team scored, and we'll call that away goals. We need to we always know that there's going to be a home team and an away team selected, because there isn't an option that is not selectable at present. So the only real thing that we need to worry about now is the timestamp, just to make sure that's a valid date. So we need to how do we do that again? If date time, so I've forgotten how to do that now. If date time dot parse match dot date timestamp. Oh no, it's datetime dot try parse, isn't it? I can't remember. I'm tired. If I'm just going to check to see if we've actually entered a value. So if match dot timestamp is not null. What's going on here with my keys? Fat fingers. Else. So we add another error. Oops. For the timestamp. Please make sure you've entered a valid date for this match. If we reach this part of the code, then everything's okay. We need to create a new match, or we need to pass a new match into our repository and save it to the database, and we will redirect to matches. But first of all, we obviously need to create the repository stuff. I'm just going to put a breakpoint on there so that if we ever reach that, it's not actually going to redirect to matches. But let's just test this validation before we start writing to the database. So I'll press F5 to build it. So build started. Build succeeded. Now what you might find is the match.home goals and match.away goals might actually default to 0, which is obviously valid, but it's not what we entered, so we didn't actually enter anything. So if I hit create, it'll be interesting to see what errors come back through. So it's just waiting, and it's bombed out. The view data item that has the key home team ID is of type system. Oh, I know why. Right. Because we're posting to the post method, it's actually trying to display the view again. But we haven't actually created this new list in the database. Sorry, we haven't actually created this new list of stuff for the post method. So we probably shouldn't do this really, because it's like reusing code. But we'll copy and paste. What we should be doing is we should actually put this into our repository so that we can get the teams back anytime we like. But what I'll do is I'll just I'll just edit this, just stop it, and I'll copy and paste it into there. So if we ever do reach this part with some bad validation, we have got the list of stuff. But normally you would, instead of duplicating this code, you would put it somewhere else to so that it was you only had to change it in one place and not have to change it in two separate methods. Maybe we'll go through that at the end of the application just to tidy things up. But basically what we're doing is we're just duplicating it, so we're generating the drop-down list items for both the get method and the post, because they both potentially return that back to the view where we show the form. In this case, if we get back to the form in the post method, it's because we've made an error, so obviously we still need the drop-down list so that we can actually correct what we were doing. So if that made any sense, hopefully you're following and not falling asleep. So build that. Build succeeded. If we refresh the page, it'll ask us, do we want to resubmit the form? Yes, we do. And hopefully this time it'll show us some validation error messages, hopefully telling us that we haven't entered an away goal. So we haven't entered the number of goals for the home team. So if I enter 1, it's now recognizing, and you'll notice that it's actually returned 1 because we did enter it originally, so it's saving what we're selecting. If I enter 2 for the away team, create, it's now asking us for a valid date, and if I enter a valid date, it should hit that breakpoint. So I'll do 18th September 2016. It might accept that format, I don't know. No, so 18. So yeah, now it's picked that up and formatted the timestamp. So if we hover over, we can see 18th to the 9th. But it's hitting this breakpoint. Now what we didn't do is we didn't check to see if the two teams were different, because it's no good having a home team versus the same team away. So what we need to do is we just need to say if match.hometeamid is not equal to match.awayteamid, then we can proceed with what we're doing. Else we need to put another error message in. In fact, we'll put 2 error messages in, one for the home team ID and one for the away team ID, and we'll basically say, please make sure that the teams are different for home and away sides, and we'll just copy and paste that. And hopefully this time when we run it, just press F5, it should pick up that just click on add match. So if I put 1, 2, oops, 1, 2, and the timestamp 18th of September, it should still throw an error. You can see, please make sure that the teams are different for home and away sides, but it has saved everything else. If I put Manchester United, this is going to be a valid match and it's going to reach that breakpoint. There we go, it's clicked in, so it's wanting to redirect to matches, but first we should obviously create that match and save it into the database. So what we need to do is we need to go to our matches repository, and let's open the teams repository. We can just copy and paste the add and save changes method in there as well. There we go, and obviously changing it to become match db.matches, and change that to the M, and this one's pretty much the same, just save changes, we don't need to change that. And now if we go back to our matches controller, we can say have we got a matches repository open? No, we need to just matches repository matches, and then we say matches repository dot add match that we're passing in, and then matches rep dot save changes. So that means that we've passed all the validation, we've gotten to here, we're talking to our repository that talks to the database, we're saying, right, add this match that we've just created, save the changes, and then redirect to the actual list of matches. So I'll just remove that breakpoint and run it again. Hopefully it's ready. Yep, so add match. And instead of saying there are no matches to display, we should actually get a list of the matches that we create. So I can say Tottenham versus Newcastle United, and I'll say 5-0 Joshua, 18th of September, and hit create. Bang. And now we're back to our list page. You can see it's actually showing the home team, which is Tottenham, number 1, the away team, number 3, which was Newcastle United, the result, which was 5-0 obviously, the date of match is right there, and obviously that's reading directly from the database. Now you might be wondering, how is it that I can get this list to basically show up with the team names? So that's what we need to do next. So we need to just terminate this here, and we need to have a look and see what's happening on this page. So we go to matches index, and you can see what we're pulling in is actually the home team ID. And what we need to do is we need to extend what a match is, so that we can add a little bit of a function to say, or a method to say, right, what is the team name that corresponds to this number. So what we need to do is we need to create what's called a partial class, and we already know what a match is. It's like coming from our database, so we can't actually edit the database. We don't want to change what a match actually is in the database, but we can add properties to it by just creating a partial class, which is done by going to the models folder, clicking on add, and clicking on class, and we'll call this match, and we'll get an error because we've already got a class called match. So it says missing partial modifier on a declaration of type match. Another declaration of this type exists, and it does because we already have the matches from our database. But if we put partial class, you'll see the error disappears, because what we're actually doing is this is just an addition to a class that already exists. And what we can actually do is we can write a little method that says we can add methods to this, which we can then call from, like, we've got these different properties. We've got like away team ID or home goals and whatever. We can just add another property to say home team name, and what that'll do is that'll basically allow us to call a little method in here to get the information that we need. So if I put public string team name, home team name, I can actually reference my team repository to get the name of the team that corresponds to the home team by doing a little bit of funky coding here. I'll type it in first so that you can see what I'm talking about, and I'll just explain through it. So team repository, teams rep equals new. Oops. Is it? Yeah, it's a teams repository, not a team repository. What's that saying to me here? Maybe I need to put that outside of the into the declaration, so I can say team repository teams rep equals new teams repository. Is that going to work? Yeah. So I've put that outside so all the methods can actually access the team repository from within here. So I can actually say return teams rep dot. That's not going to work, is it? This needs to be static. Oh no, it doesn't. Oh god. Let's not even access the repository. Sorry. core data context db equals new. This is probably an easier way to do it, to be honest. db.teams. That's not going to work, is it? Well, I've completely screwed this up, so I'm going to see you in the next video.